So good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Geneva. We seek to meet you wherever you are on your journey and invite you to be part of this congregation in which we draw wisdom from all the world's religions, balanced with the insights of modern science. We seek to build a diverse, beloved community within our virtual walls and hope to inspire and accompany one another as we act for peace and justice in our larger world. Today is Father's Day. So in honor of the subject of this auspicious occasion, I want to talk about men, masculinity, maleness, men. I can feel my spine straightening and my voice deepening as I speak. Masculinity, machismo, militarism. There is something goofy that happens when we talk about manhood or being a man in today's America. Men of a certain age certainly have role models for what it means to be a man. And these figures, however, are rarely the trinity of male wholesomeness. Bob Rogers, Mr. Rogers, Bob Ross, Mr. Rogers, and Steve Irwin. These are figures I hope to return to in a future sermon. Instead, when I was a kid, my brother and I spent Sunday and Saturday rainy afternoons with Clint Eastwood, all squinty-eyed, grumpy, and bow-legged in those terrific and terrible spaghetti westerns. I also tend to think of Arnold Schwarzenegger, especially in his 1982 film, Conan the Barbarian. When he was asked about the best things in life, Conan replied, "Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of the women." I'll save my catalog for movie star impressions for a future Sunday, but suffice it to say that being a man tends to fill my head with visions of puffed out chests, martial drum beats, and the casual impenetrability of an indefatigable buffoon. At some level, this was all harmless and good fun. And I suppose that maybe I'm old enough now to realize exactly how much of a cartoon, a caricature these childhood visions of manhood are. But I remember my idols, Eastwood and Schwarzenegger, and a host of Hollywood others, and how tough was another word for man. My big brother was a tough guy. He got into fights as a teenager and developed a rather robust reputation in the neighborhood as someone not to mess with. Pretty sure my mother turned gray entirely because of his antics, bad decisions, and bloody knuckles. He was short and fast, thin and lean, with a strong jaw, hazel eyes, beautiful friends, a short temper, and an easy laugh. Most of that is still true, especially the short part. My brother taught me one of the most important lessons I've ever learned. We were in the car, his car, driving somewhere, and I forgot how the conversation started, but at some point, I was whining about not being able to keep a relationship going for longer than a few weeks. And I remember him listening quietly, then turning to me and raising a single eyebrow. My mom did that too. I'm pretty sure she learned it from Mr. Spock on Star Trek. Anyway, my brother turned to me and he said, "You know, there's a common denominator to all of your relationship problems." He then turned his eyes back to the road and waited for me to catch up. Unfortunately, it took me more than a second. "You mean me? I'm the root of all my problems." He didn't say anything. He just smirked. Did I mention my brother's a jerk? Yeah, my brother was a tough guy, but he's not dumb. And there's something weird about being a man in today's America. This would be a good time to do our thing. So with our mics still muted, I'm going to remove the Zoom spotlight for a moment. And what I want you to do is interface with your screens. Go touch that button that says view and pull that down until it says gallery. And if you haven't activated your camera, you should know by now this was an awesome time to have done so. So you're going to know everything is going to be working right because all you're going to see is a million tiny faces. So now looking at those faces, your community, and in the spirit of our friend, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III of Trinity Church here in Chicago, I want you to turn to one of those squares. Doesn't matter which one. Turn to one of those squares, your neighbor, and say, neighbor, oh, neighbor, we are enough. Amen. Amen. Yeah, we are enough. So let's do a quick survey for all the men and male identifying individuals out there. When was the last time you cried? And I don't mean snuffling at a sappy commercial or howling when you stepped on a pile of Legos, or even whimpering at writing that last check to the IRS. I mean, really crying. One that left you bruised and tender and aching and limp and exhausted, an experience where you had no control. That kind of cry. Anyone? Maybe a couple of you. Maybe some of you have and don't want to share. I can respect that. I also suspect some men are out there wondering what I'm getting at. What's the point here? No, I don't cry like that. I used to, but I'm not a little boy anymore. I'm a man, and a real man doesn't cry. How old were you when someone first told you to be a man, to gut it up? When someone first said, stop crying, don't cry, stop with the emotions, pick yourself up. Don't be a baby. Grow some balls. Man up. Act like a man. Don't tattle. Don't back down. Stand up. Fight back. Be a man. I bet most of you can't remember that first time. But you might remember the last time. The day you finally took all of those feelings of hurt, your feelings of isolation, of loneliness, of disconnection, and ignored them. Push them down, or at least away, because it's safer to have no feelings at all. Like Clint and Arnold, stoic, resolved, angry, and ready to do something about it. These are the men that men look up to, not confused, not conflicted, not wounded, not sad, not lonely, not alienated. Men don't look up to figures that embody those emotions. Men don't look up to weakness. A couple of years ago, I watched a documentary on Netflix called The Mask You Live In. In the movie, a sports coach suggests that you can start a fight at any lunchtime recess by asking a group of boys a single question. Quote, who is the sissy around here? The inevitability of the resulting fight can be attributed to a variety of things. Boys will be boys. But the question is why? The coach suggested that being seen as weak is shameful, and shame drives aggression and the need to appear strong in the eyes of other boys. And if this sounds Darwinian, it is. There is a very well-documented trait that all predators seem to have. If you want to survive, you don't show weakness to other predators. Here's the thing. This principle is also what organizes and regulates many of those peer groups among young people. They rank themselves by shame, police each other through shame. And boys that fail to play along can lose status, and more importantly, belonging and membership. What happens to people that are stifled like this? Studies show that young males more readily turn to alcohol and drug use to numb their pain and their fear and their loneliness, because it is precisely in those moments of excess where their opportunities lie for lowering barriers, for genuine expressions of emotion, for bonding. At least that's the hope. That is, boys use and abuse alcohol and drugs as one of their contexts for social experience, because it's where many males feel free to express emotions. Should we be surprised that males are also twice as likely to die by overdose? Alienation from your emotions takes its toll. Nationwide, only 70% of boys, compared with 80% of girls, graduate on time. When it comes to dropouts, the rates are 50% higher for boys than girls. Boys are 2 times more likely to be in special education, 3 times more likely to get diagnosed with ADHD, 2 times more likely to be suspended, 4 times more likely to be expelled. Alienation from your emotions is hazardous to your health. Men are 3.5 times more likely to commit suicide. Men die on average 10 years younger than women. Men are almost twice as likely to die from heart disease and twice as likely to die from cancer. Alienation from your emotions doesn't leave you with a lot of options. If your peer group only recognizes or encourages anger as your one valid emotional response, externalizing or showing your emotions is not going to go well. Are you upset? Get angry. Are you afraid? Get angry. Are you hurt or lonely or frustrated? Get angry. It's a short step from being angry all the time to doing angry things. When something bad happens to you, maybe you need to do something bad to someone else. Maybe you should avenge your humiliation and shame. Maybe you should fight. Which brings me to the single most glaring fact of all about violence. 90% of murders are committed by males. 94% of mass shootings are also committed by males. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. About this point, you're probably saying to yourself, wow, happy Father's Day, Reverend Scott. And that's fair. But this Father's Day, here on what we all desperately hope is the end of a year of pandemic isolation, what I want to say is this: it doesn't have to be this way, not for any of us. And while we just explored a bit of the underside of being male in America, I believe that the way out just happens to be irrespective of sex or gender. I just want to be explicit here this morning that all of this was inspired by the hope that the solution also applies to tough, manly men. Now, I hope that at least some of you are familiar with my personal hero, the scientist and storyteller, Dr. Brene Brown. And if you're not a fan, you're invited to keep that to yourself. Some number of years ago, I was introduced to her 12-minute TED Talk from back in 2010, The Power of Vulnerability. For those of you who are somehow unfamiliar with her work, Dr. Brown studies human connection. Long story short, Dr. Brown suggests that connection, quote, is what gives meaning and purpose to our lives. Connection, the ties that bind, community. And I suppose this makes sense, right? We are made for each other. Humans are social animals, after all. We hear variations on that theme from all corners. And it's one of the reasons why this pandemic has been so hard on so many. Dr. Brown's research shows that all humans are, quote, neurobiologically hardwired for belonging and connection. But for it to work, for it to mean something, for it to be real, she found that for a great many of us, there is something in the way. Something that almost always gets in the way. Something that has made American adults the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated group in the history of our planet. Dr. Brown says that that thing is shame. She describes it this way: is there something about me that if other people know it or see it, I will be unworthy of connection? Dr. Brown goes on to say that, quote, shame is universal. No one wants to talk about it, and the less you talk about it, the more you have it. You have shame. I have shame. Women have shame. Men never talk about it, so they must have lots of it. The path from shame to what Dr. Brown calls, quote, wholehearted living lies not through the valley of the shadow of death, but instead through an entirely different door. A door which leads to the birthplace of joy, creativity, belonging, and love. A door labeled vulnerability. I can almost hear Clint Eastwood grinding his teeth, so let me say it again. Vulnerability. Vulnerability is scary. It's truly scary. Becoming vulnerable willingly may actually mean violating and hopefully transcending our innate Darwinian survival wiring. And that is hard. So hard that most of us have experience failing at it. In fact, we do some pretty unhelpful things to cope with the fear and anxiety that come with feeling vulnerable. For example, we numb it. We don't want to feel our feelings, so we bury them under consumption and overwork and exhaustion. Here's the problem. We cannot selectively numb. We cannot say this fear, this shame, this guilt, and that disappointment. I don't want to feel any of this anymore. None of this. Problem is we numb the fear right along with everything else, right along with joy, gratitude, and happiness. We numb. And this is as American as baseball, apple pie, and craft beer. We numb, and maybe we don't feel worse, but we also don't feel better. And that makes us feel bad. So we numb more. But we don't just numb. When we feel vulnerable, we become brittle. We become intolerant. We try to make the uncertain certain. Uncertainty breeds fear, anxiety, and doubt. And that makes us feel vulnerable, which makes us feel afraid, which makes us feel even more vulnerable. Instead, we choose answers over questions. Loudest voice wins, truth and strength and clarity, binaries. To maintain the lines, our stuff, our worth, our sanity, we attack and blame and fight, which makes others feel afraid and therefore more vulnerable. And now we fully understand today's politics and religion. You know what else we do? Dr. Brown says that we perfect. We take the fear and discomfort and anxiety that falls out of our vulnerability and we translate it into how we treat our lawns, our home, our stuff, our reputations, and our children. We obsess about what we can control. Little Johnny needs to get good grades or he's never going to get into Yale. Never mind that he's only 7. He needs to work hard. I'll call you later after I mow the lawn, wash the car, weed the garden, and polish the silver. It's a lot. You know what else we do? We pretend. We pretend that we are islands. I am responsible for me, and right? Me. We pretend that our choices do not profoundly affect others. My mask doesn't protect me, so why bother with one? Vaccines are not right for me or my family. Critical race theory only teaches people to hate America. Numbing, blaming, perfecting, pretending. We have lots of ways to cope with vulnerability, to avoid being vulnerable. And all of that armor keeps us from the one thing we must do to have true, authentic, meaningful connection. The one thing we all desperately want. The one thing we humans, male, female, male identified, female identified, children, whatever, the one thing we humans need. If we are to be seen, to be known, to be loved, to live in a way that feels meaningful, we must first become vulnerable. Dr. Brown tells us that the first step to meaningful connection is to move past our shame. Gotta feel the feelings and face that perhaps unconscious fear we are not worthy of love and connection. We UUs have something to say about that, don't we? The first of the Unitarian Universalist principles says, quote, "We covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every human being." That's where we as UUs start. We believe that you are worthy of love and connection. You are, and you are, and you are. All of us are. Just get over it. Just as you are right now, you are worthy. So that's the first step. For the next step, I turned to my wife, life coach, teacher, and seminarian Julia Jones. And what she told me about taking that next step to letting yourself be known, that's your homework for the summer. She suggested that we start with someone else. This is counterintuitive maybe, but connection is a two-way street. So start with curiosity. Be curious about others. Ask a question. And be prepared to ask questions that go beyond the weather or a sports team or whatever it is that you do for a living. Questions are excellent tools. Ask a question, and you can quickly suss out if that other person is ready to share or willing to, or if they are even deserving of your story, because not everyone is. And that's okay. Start with a question. Ask. Be curious. Listen. And when the time comes, share. It's pretty simple. Might not be easy, but that is why we practice. My brother once told me that I was the root of all of my problems. Today, I'd offer a coda to his insight all those years ago. At the root of me, at the root of all of us, is a spark that takes more than one breath to fan into flame. I need your help to be me. We need each other to transcend our lizard brains, our Darwinian wiring, to reach past our shame, our doubts, our fears of inadequacy. We can't do it by ourselves. So let me close with this hope, the hope that someone somewhere has already told you 3 simple, empowering words. And no, I don't mean I love you, though those are awesomely empowering. I mean these three. You are enough. And if no one has ever said them to you, let me tell you right now that even with every single one of your glorious imperfections, your missteps, your brokenness, your weirdness, you are worthy and you are enough. Connection, it's what we crave. And while today I'm looking especially at all the tough guys out there, our sex or gender or age or ethnicity or nationality or personal history, none of that matters. At root, we are human, wired for struggle, adrift on a pale blue dot, third from a sun spinning on one distant arm of an unremarkable galaxy, one among hundreds of billions of such galaxies. We are small, vulnerable, but we do not have to be alone. And that is our gospel. I love you. Happy Father's Day. And as we prepare to leave this place, continue your journey in love. Care for one another and care for this, our earth, and do justice and make peace. And as you go, know that whatever taste or touch you've had in this time and place of hope, joy, love, or peace, that goes with you out into the world. We are different for having spent this time together. Have a great summer. And remember, live boldly and with thanksgiving.